Do you ever have one of those days where you feel completely exhausted from running around, just constantly busy, but then you look at your to-do list at 5 o'clock and it feels like you've accomplished absolutely nothing of real value? Yeah, you are definitely not alone. Welcome to today's Explainer. I am so excited about this one because we are going to decode the famous 80-20 rule, also known as the Pareto Principle, and we're going to show you exactly how to leverage it to unlock some true efficiency in your life.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We'll be covering Section 1, what is the Pareto Principle? Section 2, the origins of 80-20. Section 3, the rule in real life. Section 4, top time management tactics. And finally, Section 5, criticisms and limitations.
All right, let's dive right in with Section 1. What is the Pareto Principle?
To really get this concept, we first have to completely shatter a pretty common illusion, which is the idea that our daily lives are perfectly balanced. We tend to just assume that our inputs and outputs are evenly distributed, right? Like 1 unit of effort equals 1 unit of reward. But honestly, the universe is heavily skewed. The Pareto Principle, at its most basic, states that roughly 80% of our results, or the effects we see, actually stem from just 20% of our efforts, or the causes. Notice how massively unequal that distribution is? The entire point of this principle is to recognize that life just isn't evenly distributed. Whether we're talking about your workplace productivity, your relationships, or your business revenue, a tiny fraction of what you do is actually driving the vast majority of your success. If we can just spot those few critical things, and frankly, boldly ignore the massive unimportant things, we can yield vastly greater results with way less total effort.
Moving right along to Section 2, the origins of 80-20.
So, you might be wondering who actually sat down and figured this all out. Well, the history here is surprisingly quirky. First, we have an Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto. Back in the late 1800s, he observed that 80% of the wealth in Italy was owned by just 20% of the people. Fascinated by this, he started looking for the same ratio elsewhere. He literally went out into his garden and noticed that 20% of his pea pods were yielding 80% of the actual peas. Crazy, right? But Pareto didn't actually name the rule after himself. Fast forward to the 1950s, and we meet psychologist and quality control pioneer Joseph Juran. Juran took Pareto's garden and economic observations and applied them directly to corporate operations management. He discovered that 80% of production problems were caused by just 20% of production methods. Juran actually coined the term Pareto Principle to honor the original economist. And he gave us this incredibly memorable phrasing. He said, "In any situation, there are the vital few causes and the trivial many."
That brings us to Section 3, the rule in real life.
Okay, so that's the theory and the history. But let's see how universally this rule actually applies across modern society. Take the tech world, for example. In software development, if a team focuses on fixing just the top 20% of the most commonly reported bugs, that targeted effort actually eliminates a massive 80% of the related errors and system crashes for their users.
Let's keep this moving. Think about your own home right now. According to the research, you likely wear just 20% of your clothes 80% of the time. We all have that one favorite sweater or a pair of jeans we constantly reach for, while the trivial many just gather dust in the back of the closet.
And this applies heavily to our social and professional interactions too. I mean, have you ever sat through a really long work meeting? In a typical 10-person meeting, you'll usually find that just 20% of the people, so literally just 2 vocal individuals, end up doing 80% of the talking. It's not just some abstract business theory, it's a fundamental pattern of human behavior.
Let's transition to Section 4, Top Time Management Tactics.
Knowing this pattern is everywhere is great and all, but how do we actually weaponize it for our own productivity? Let's shift from observation to action. I want to dive into these practical frameworks because these are tactics you can implement literally the minute this explainer ends. According to the source material, one of the best ways to apply the 80-20 rule to your personal success is through what's called the 3 C's for living without limits. First up is clarity. This means knowing exactly who you are, what you want, and having written plans to get there. Second is competence. Rather than spreading yourself painfully thin trying to be decent at every single thing, focus your skill building intensely on the 20% of tasks that contribute to 80% of your desired results. Become absolutely outstanding at the vital few. And third is concentration. That is the sheer self-discipline to stay locked onto a single, high-value task until it's completely finished, boldly abandoning all those trivial distractions.
Now, if you're facing a really complex scenario, you can systematically isolate the highest impact issues using this brilliant 5-step problem-solving method. Step 1, identify all your problems. Step 2, identify the root causes of those problems. Step 3, categorize them. Basically, group the problems that share similar root causes together.
Step 4, assign a severity value from 1 to 10 based on their actual impact. And finally, Step 5, develop your plan to attack only the top 20% of those root causes, knowing that resolving them will yield 80% of your desired relief.
To actually execute that plan, you're going to need a tactic called timeboxing. This is a real game changer. It's where you dedicate a specific, unbreakable block of time in your calendar exclusively for your most important 20% tasks. You have to treat this block of time like a scheduled, uncancelable meeting with your absolute most important client, except that client is your own deep work. It's an incredible way to eliminate distractions and literally stop procrastination in its tracks.
Now, what's really interesting here is the math behind it. If you're looking for a super concrete way to implement timeboxing, try the 96-minute rule. If you work a standard 8-hour day, exactly 20% of that day is 96 minutes. The strategy here is to dedicate those 96 minutes, maybe first thing in the morning when your energy is at its highest, to purely high-value output with zero distractions. The idea is that you will have completed 80% of your true needle-moving work for the entire day in just over an hour and a half.
All right, let's wrap things up with Section 5, Criticisms and Limitations.
It sounds almost like a magic trick, doesn't it? But we really need to ground this explainer in reality and acknowledge that while this productivity tool is brilliant, it for sure has its flaws. Keep this quote firmly in mind. The Pareto Principle is not a mathematical law. Rather, it is an observation. It is a heuristic. It's a rule of thumb. You simply cannot take it as absolute, literal truth in every single scenario. Sometimes the ratios fluctuate. In a company, it might be that 30% of employees generate 60% of the sales. The exact numbers might wobble a bit, so please don't get paralyzed trying to find a perfect 80-20 split in every single data set you look at.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is avoiding the trap of misinterpretation. Some people hear 80-20 and think, oh great, I only have to put in 20% effort to get 80% results. Absolutely not. To achieve those 80% results, you still have to put 100% effort into that specific 20% focus area. Also, while you should prioritize the vital few, you can't ignore the trivial many forever. Like, if you never ever respond to your routine work emails because they are part of the 80% low-value tasks, well, they're eventually going to pile up into a massive problem. Balance is definitely required.
Another major limitation, pointed out in the source material, is that this principle is inherently backward-looking. It analyzes past data. It cannot predict the future. If a business overemphasizes their past successes, say, focusing solely on the 20% of customers currently driving profits, they might completely miss out on exploring new emerging markets. Furthermore, critics point out that accepting this rule blindly can sometimes create analytical blind spots. For example, if 20% of a population controls the vast majority of resources, simply brushing that off as a natural Pareto outcome might cause us to totally ignore the actual underlying structural shifts driving those numbers.
The Pareto Principle is an incredibly powerful lens for cutting through the noise, as long as we use it wisely as a guide rather than some rigid law. As we finish up this explainer, I want to leave you with a direct challenge to optimize your routine right now. Look at your endless to-do list, take a breath, and ask yourself, what is your vital 20% for today? Find it, timebox it, and get to work.